All right, hello everybody. Today I've got something for you that this is a weird book. It's it's extremely good is what I'll say to start. It's it's a story about the end of the world, and it's very strange in a number of ways that I'll get to. It's very depressing yet fascinating at the same time. It's I I have notes here about what I want to talk about, but at the same time, I'm not sure how to describe it. It's a book that takes place about a year after a nuclear war. And it's not just any nuclear war. It's a nuclear war where they use these things that they in the book that they call cobalt bombs, where it basically spreads out a radioactive dust that is basically spreading all over the world, and it's going to engulf the whole world. Um, and the book is about kind of the last year that the characters have, and it's a fairly, narrow scope book. There are only about five main characters. We have Peter and his wife Mary. Peter is like a liaison officer for a submarine. We have Dwight Towers and Moira. Dwight is the captain of the submarine. Moira is like she's a friend of Peter and Mary's who kind of helps him cope with, the coming end of the world. And then we have John Osborne, who's a scientist who also works on the submarine. And, there are a few other side characters, but most of the story is about them, and they're dealing with this kind of like last year or so of humanity. And it's one of those books where there's a, on the, yeah, there's a statement here from Kirkus Reviews on the inner spine, not spine, but inner cover slip that says, an obsessive, nightmarish book, the more so because it's written on almost a deadpan level of narration. It's weird because nowadays when people write apocalyptic fiction, there's always something pressing, something crazy, something bombastic. There's zombies or disease or illness. There's a lot of freak out, And this book has none of that, to the point where it's almost unrealistic, right? Like, you have this dust that's spreading from the northern hemisphere down to the southern hemisphere, and it's eventually going to just cover the whole, world with so much background radiation that no human being can survive. And yet, at the same time, everybody... I mean, the book takes place a little bit after, I think 6 months after the war ended or something like that. That's where the book picks up. And so, I guess everybody's had time to cope, but at the same time, everybody's really calm about what's going on. There aren't any significant riots. There aren't, there isn't a massive push for people to go as far south as possible, right? Like, the people who are in the cities that this wave of radioactive dust is getting closer to aren't, walking south in hopes of outrunning it. They aren't building bunkers to try to, wait it out to survive. It's very, so Nevil Shute I guess he was a British guy who later expatriated to Australia and kind of, became an Australian citizen. But, at the same time, this book has the most, British, stiff upper lip feel of any book that I think I've ever read. And, there's all kinds of weirdness. For instance, in the in the introduction, which is written by Gideon Haig, they actually note that the cobalt bomb is itself a work of fiction. It wouldn't do what the book says it would do, probably, right? I'm trying to find that passage. I probably should have done it before I started this video, but give me just a second here. Man. Yeah, the so-called cobalt bomb, a thermonuclear device whose destructive capacity was based chiefly on radioactivity rather than explosive force. The cobalt bomb had been mooted by the Manhattan Project's disillusioned Leo Szilard in February 1950 to evoke nuclear warfare's alarming potentialities. It'd be championed by his hawkish contemporary Edward Teller perversely as a means of scaring mankind straight. The cobalt bomb is the product of the imagination of high-minded people who want to use this specter to frighten us into a heaven of peace. For various technical reasons, the cobalt bomb flourished only in fiction, being unleashed, well, thankfully, being unleashed in the 1960s in Dr. Strangelove and Planet of the Apes. And truth be told, the science of On the Beach is flawed at best. Thermonuclear fallout would not distribute itself evenly around the world. Shelter would be possible. But Shute had chosen his weapon wisely. This is one of those books where if you're feeling depressed or unhappy, you probably shouldn't read it because it's very hopeless throughout. And the narrator, it's not a character. Like the narrator it's a third-person perspective book, and like the narrator is very dry and deadpan, just like the reviewer said, to the point where it's like where all of that excess histrionics like end up in you. It's hard to describe, but like there's this growing sense of dread that, as you're reading this book, that as the amount of paper under your right thumb decreases and you're getting closer and closer, and every, possibility of these people having, some kind of a chance gets slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. You feel it. It's very powerful in a strange way, because like you would expect that a lot of these that the people around them, not necessarily these characters, because they're all military trained and very rational people, they might be able to manage the kind of stiff upper lip that you see in the book. But at the same time, you would think that people would be pushing south in much greater numbers and stuff like that. It's kind of justified by the fact that like all the oil is drilled in the northern hemisphere kind of thing, and that they just run out of fuel for pretty much everything. But like at the same time, despite the amount of like, well, this is, there's somewhere at the back of your head, you're always like, well, this is a little bit unrealistic in that sense. It still manages to pull you in with the very strong, like the very strong characters that you see throughout the book, and how they're dealing with things. It's a story about human drama at its core, because it's about these people and how they spend the last 12, 14 months of their lives, right? It's there's a few long chances, right? Like there's a few things in the book that give you a little bit of hope, that are like, well, maybe this is gonna work out, maybe this is gonna work out, and they go through all of them in a lot of detail, and I don't want to necessarily spoil too much, but whatever happens, they're not enough, if that makes sense. But going through the exploration of these chances is incredibly interesting and very like gripping, because you're like, well, they even on a second reading, it's still like, well, what exactly happened here? How did this work out? What did they measure here? What did they see here? It's very I don't know. It's a really strong. It's got like a really strong narrative pull to it. Like you just open up the book and it's not like a super duper long book. It's got fairly large text, and it's not super thick. And you just kind of get pulled into it and you just go through it. It's strange because on some level the people in the book kind of give up. And you wonder whether you would do the same thing, or whether, the people that would do the same thing, or what would happen. Because, like, everyone's a little nuts in one way or another, right? Like Dwight Towers has some issues with like letting go of his family in Connecticut. They're dead, right? The war is over. The entire northern hemisphere has been covered in radioactive cobalt dust, and yet he's still kind of holding on to something, and that's a he's an interesting character. Dwight Towers is pretty cool. Not pretty cool is putting it glibly. I mean, like, he's a interesting character with some good depth to him too. And all the characters that are that way. It's I don't know. It's it just bugs me that there's no riots, there's no roving, tribes of bandits, there's no zombies, right? Like, because nowadays, anytime anybody writes something like this, where it's like, it's the end of the world, humanity is dying out, almost certainly. There's a few chances, and let's look at them, but they're chances. People nowadays, they have to make everything so bombastic, and like this book avoids all of that in like a really in such a way that it's almost unbelievable. You know what I mean? And even though the level of deadpanness is kind of unbelievable, you still find yourself drawn into the characters and their the way that they're coping with this. Everybody's a little nuts. What I'll say is that the book has excellent prose, a very good mix of like description and pushing the story forward. There's no like long flowery paragraphs describing this or that. There's always something is always grounded in one of the characters and what they're perceiving and how that character is like thinking about like making use of that perception, if that makes sense. It's like they describe the situation of the roads, but they're doing it in the context of, well, how long is it going to take me to get over to Melbourne so I can, talk with my commanding officer and blah, 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 blah. And so, like, you never feel like the story is slowing down on you. It just keeps creeping at you in a very, like, disturbing way. Like, you finish reading this book and you just don't want to do anything or talk to anybody. Even if you're perfectly of sound mind before you get started. It's one of those books that seems a lot shorter than it looks. I mean, like I say, it doesn't look like a super thick, but it's not it's not skinny, you know what I mean? And like, it just flies by because you keep wanting to know, how does this work out? How does this work out? How does this work out? And there's this great twist at the ending that like just sticks the knife in and twists it, because like you just don't know. There are things that happen at the end that you just don't know for sure. And like, it's just it's interesting how all the characters react to that. By the time you get to the last, the book is separated into like chapters, but not like nowadays where like a chapter is like 5,000 words. Like I think there's 7 chapters in the whole book, and maybe 8, and they're very long chapters. You kind of forget that the book is separated into chapters. They're so long. But it's one of those things where, you sit there and you read it and you kind of hope for a miracle, and that the desire to see how things turn out kind of pushes you along, and the narrative never slows down to like revel in the craziness of the world that they're living in. It's just like, we're just regular people. We have to keep pushing forward step by step, until we can't walk anymore. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I say that the characters are kind of like have this like ridiculous amount of stiff upper lippedness, but like, is it just that we've joined them after they've already gone through the 5 stages and they're all in acceptance at this point, to the point where they're like, well, even if there maybe is some hope, maybe it's not worth chasing because of what we've already lost, kind of thing. I don't know. I'd say it's a fascinating book. I'd say it's a really strong piece of fiction that, like, I've been wanting to reread it for a while, and I've been putting it off because I didn't feel like I was in the right mindset for it. Like, it really does hit you hard in the gut. And so, I can't really, unless you who's watching this happens to be feeling depressed in some significant way, then I can't recommend it. But like, for anybody else who wants to see like a literary masterpiece, who is not feeling like hopeless in any significant way, I'd say I'd say go give it a look, because it's really, it's fascinating and moving at the same time. It's very like, you just can't stop. You can't put it down once you get past a certain point, or at least you don't want to. It's one of those books where there's a strong human drama at the core, more rather than like some kind of intricate plot where the characters are making these complicated plans and stuff like that. Most of what happens is quite simple and quite straightforward, and a lot of it is the stuff that you and the characters are expecting. There's never a point where they're like, oh, but this will solve the problem, and then then the hopes get dashed unexpectedly. Like the few hopes that they actually have, they're like, yeah, this is a long shot, and nobody really believes. This guy is a crackpot, and he's saying that like this is going to happen, but like we don't know, we don't believe him, right? He's all by himself spouting this, this overly optimistic stuff, but at the same time, we're going to check. We need to know. We need to know for sure. And finding out for sure is one of those things that really makes this book kind of gripping. Is that you're like, oh, I realize that this is probably the way things are going to go. And in the first 20 or 30 pages, they tell you, yeah, it's going to go poorly. But watching how it happens and how the characters react to it and how kind of humanity manages to try to maintain its dignity at the end is, I don't know, it's worth going through. So yeah, On the Beach by Nevil Shute. As long as you're not feeling depressed, I recommend this book. If you are depressed, wait until you're not depressed to go read it. And it's worth thinking, like, if you found out that you had a month, it's not enough time to dig a bunker. It's not enough time to do this. It's not enough time to do that. And even if you wanted to, dig a bunker, all of the machinery is out of operation because, there's no fuel. What do you do in that case? Do you just give up hope? Do you try to live to the end? Do you go nuts in a flurry of bacchanalia? I don't know. But it's one of those books that makes you think about that for yourself too. So, yeah, that's what I've got for today. On the Beach by Nevil Shute, fantastic novel. One of those stories where, like, even though it's mostly about the human drama, there's enough, like, stuff where you don't feel like it's, like, whining at you, if that makes sense. And the characters trying to maintain their dignity in the face of the end of the world is another thing that kind of keeps it from feeling too emotional, if that makes sense. It doesn't tear jerk you. It just gives you this kind of dry, empty sense of dread. And, for that, it's a very interesting read. And, yeah, highly recommended if you think you can take it mentally. So that's all I've got. If you're still here and you like what I'm doing and you want to help the channel out, there's all kinds of ways to do that. You know what to do. And, yeah, I'll try to have something for you tomorrow. And I don't know what it is at this point, but we'll see what I can figure out. Anyway, have a good week, and I'll see you all later.